The following research is part of the National Institute for Congestion Reduction funded by the United States Department of Transportation through the University Transportation Center program. Learn more at www.nicr.usf.edu.
Welcome to Out of My Lane, a podcast of the Center for Urban Transportation Research at the University of South Florida in Tampa. I'm Wayne Garcia, your host. This podcast is devoted to making your time getting from point A to point B more efficient and more enjoyable. Each episode will look at a different aspect of mobility and transportation as we examine ways to make traffic less congested and travel options more plentiful and safe. Our guests today are two researchers from the USF Center for Urban Transportation Research, CUTR. You'll commonly hear that called CUTR. And they are Dr. Fred Mannering and Dr. Shaw Lee. Fred, Shaw, thanks for being with us.
It's great to be here.
Thank you.
Today in this podcast, which is our first episode of Out of My Lane, we want to look at what CUTR does and how it helps drivers not only in the Tampa Bay region but everywhere. And also now CUTR is participating in part of a larger project and grant called NICR, N-I-C-R, and we'll get to that in just a bit. But let me tell you about my guests. Dr. Mannering is the executive director of the Center for Urban Transportation Research. He is a USF College of Engineering professor of civil and environmental engineering. His research interests are the application of statistical and econometric methods to analyze data relating to highway safety, transportation economics, travel behavior. That's interesting. I want to come back to behavior, and then a variety of engineering-related problems. Dr. Shaw Lee is an associate professor in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering and also affiliated with CUTR. He serves as the director of NICR here, which is a U.S. Department of Transportation National University Transportation Center. And NICR, N-I-C-R, I know it sounds like I'm nicer than you, right? But it is the National Institute for Congestion Reduction. Because if you're listening to this podcast, I know that you've sat in congestion before, or you're probably sitting in it right now because people listen to podcasts in their cars. So here on Out of My Lane, I like to start each episode with asking you all, what is your daily commute like? Let me start with Shaw Lee. Dr. Lee, your commute to work every day. Now, obviously, in the pandemic, we weren't commuting, right? At all. Are you back to commuting, and what is your commute like?
Yes, I commute a few days a week, and I primarily drive to the university. It's about 20 to 30 some minutes depending on the traffic.
And what are you driving, if I can ask?
I just drive a regular passenger car sedan.
Okay, all right. And Fred Mannering, what's your commute like?
Well, I should mention before moving to Florida, I came from West Lafayette, Indiana, which I had like a 5-minute commute. So I didn't have to think. So when I came here, I'm like 18 miles away from the university. I live in Odessa. At first, it was a 40-minute commute. I found it very frustrating because it was much longer than I was expecting. But after about 3 or 4 months, I got very used to it. And now, during the pandemic, when I didn't have to come in to work, I would just drive my car around because the commute time is a time to unwind if you pick the right roads. And the roads that I pick are usually these 2-lane roads that are off the beaten path. So it's very low stress and actually quite enjoyable time. My commuting time is quite enjoyable.
Let me start off with, I guess, the bigger picture. CUTR has been around for, quite some time in doing this research. And it is, I guess we could call it interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary. Although you two gentlemen happen to be engineers, I was struck by that behavior piece because this is not just an engineering problem of trying to deal with traffic, it's, there's a behavioral component too. So, Fred, tell me what CUTR's mission is and how it goes about doing that.
Great. Let me give you a little background. CUTR was established in 1988 by the Florida legislature, and it also established an advisory board guiding CUTR through various aspects of its research. Its founding director was Gary Brosh. We have an excellent facility on the USF campus that was built in 1995, so it took us a couple of years from 88 to 95 to get in that facility. And we currently have about 200 faculty, students, and staff that work in CUTR. So the objective of CUTR is to solve a lot of transportation-related projects, and this includes not just highway modes, but rail. We do a lot of public transit. Obviously, that was our initial goal, being urban transportation. We did have a strong focus on public transit. But we are here to help the state of Florida in almost any imaginable transportation-related problem that would come up.
Is there any single project that drivers might know, or an improvement and things that you all have looked at that they have no idea that you were looking at?
Well, there's probably so many, it would be hard to pick one out. We do motorcycle safety, maybe something you wouldn't think about immediately as something under CUTR's domain. But you can imagine in the 30 plus years that CUTR has been in existence, we've done almost everything. So almost any road you go on in Florida has been touched by CUTR in some sense.
How do y'all go about deciding of all the various pieces that go into traffic and congestion and mobility and multimodal means of traveling? How do y'all decide what you're looking at and what you can't look at, because there's just so much?
Well, the primary motivation is CUTR is funded internally, so our sponsors determine what is important. We advise them, we can give them some ideas, maybe we should look at this or that, but at the end of the day, what we decide to work on is governed to a large extent by government policy.
Yeah. And is it mostly government? Is the client, as it were, or are there private organizations that are just as devoted, or even corporate interests devoted to traffic?
Yeah, there are some. What CUTR does is mostly Florida Department of Transportation and the U.S. Department of Transportation. So it is mostly government, but there are some private projects that we do occasionally. But we're primarily, if you look at our budget, I'm guessing it's like 95% is government driven at some level.
So now that we know what CUTR is, let's talk a little bit about NICR, which is really the program that we're doing this first season of Out of My Lane about, because USF is part of this larger research effort. So how do we get involved in this program from the US DOT to reduce congestion?
Sure, maybe I can first explain what NICR is. NICR, the full name is National Institute for Congestion Reduction, and it is a national university transportation center enacted by the 2018 Appropriations Bill associated with the FAST Act. It came with a 3-year funding, and every year the federal gives us about $2.5 million, and we have a $2.5 million local match. And that's going to come up with a series of projects. We've already issued about 40 projects in research, education, and outreach. And these projects are conducted by about 60 faculty members from 4 member universities. They include DEF being the leading institution, also UC Berkeley, Texas A&M, and University. So we're actually doing a lot of work about understanding the congestion, finding the innovative solutions to reduce congestion, and doing education and outreach to have our solutions being heard and possibly being implemented by governments and industry.
Yeah, how much does government and industry listen to your kind of research? I would imagine in some fields, not so much, but in this field, it's got to be quite a bit, right? Because, they're not doing the research, they're doing the construction for the most part.
Sure. So I think, transportation is a notion that is broader than just constructing infrastructure. And it's also about how to manage and maintain the system, including not only infrastructure, but also vehicles and users, right? So, and we actually have very good partnerships with government. As Fred mentioned, NICR is also a component of CUTR, and many of our research projects are integrated. We have 100% local matching. Most of that comes from state DOTs. And when we actually develop the research project portfolio, we actually consulted and communicated frequently with local governments and tried to use our intellectuals to understand the problems of their concern and try to find the solutions. And also we have some collaborations with local industry. Many of them are about the consulting firms, helping the governments realize and implement the projects. Both government and industry personnel have been involved in our projects as stakeholders or matching providers. That way we will ensure that our project is not just doing the fundamental research, but also having a significant component of tech transfer and implementation.
So how much does the U.S. Department of Transportation sort of give you a laundry list of things that they would like to see researched, addressed, fixed? So how much of it is in your purview to say, hey, these are the things we think will make the biggest difference? Is that a blend of their thoughts and your thoughts, or do you have a lot of control in terms of where the research agenda goes?
Sure. Actually, these university transportation centers start they call it NOFO. It's basically about the scope of the work they want to see. So the governments set up some, general scope that they want to focus on. For example, congestion being a priority area. That's our UTC's centers, UTC's focus. And under this congestion, there are several topics of their interest. For example, optimize the system's reliability and efficiency for all road users. And try to use data to understand how people shift to or from transit, and look into other alternatives and options such as shared mobility transportation network companies, how they impact congestion. So they have listed some general topics. But these topics are very inclusive, and you have lots of room to do your own innovation and utilize your own creativity. And we need to develop general umbrella to respond to their call from the NOFO and to explain how we're which topic areas we think would be most relevant and important in our center. And once we get the overall center, we have to go through a yearly proposal review. So that said, there are 60 faculty members involved. They're going to write more detailed proposals, and we're going to review them, including both academia, governments, and sometimes also industry reviewers to go through these proposals and decide which ones we're going to fund in the end. And so there's lots of flexibility and room for innovation and creativity.
Can you give us a couple of examples of maybe the most interesting or promising areas of research that are going on right now, will be going on under the NICR program?
Sure. So one aspect is about to utilize the data to understand the congestion. We're in the era of
so much data, right?
Yeah, data, big data, and the transportation has changed a lot in its landscape over the past few decades in terms of the technologies of obtaining data and understanding the data. So there are different transportation sensors, some by public agencies like Florida DOT, city, And some are provided by the industry players, like those trajectory data from here and TomTom. So these data could be used to very well understand what has happened, what is happening, and what will happen about the traffic systems. So that's actually one area we focus on. Another area is utilizing, advanced methods, tools, and options to manage traffic congestion. For example, we have a leverage smartphone-based app called One Bus Away, and that is an app to provide users information about the transit bus and encourage the ridership of transit. And as you see more people ride transit, then we will have less congestion. And we have also projects about transit priority, how to coordinate transit buses with signals to have them travel faster. And if we see faster transit buses, we're going to have more people willing to take buses, and that's going to reduce congestion consequentially.
So many moving pieces of this and so much cool stuff y'all can find out. If you could just figure out why when I go home on I-275 at the end of the day, the middle lane is always faster than the fast lane on the left, that would be an innovation I'd be interested in. I have my theories. We'll talk later. How much, I think people think about traffic in terms of, the roadway, like we need some more lanes here, like a physical thing. But we've already touched on then, and you touched on it too, there's a behavioral piece. So you have behavioral researchers who are engaged in this. And I'm thinking that there's obviously a climate change piece of this as well, a motivation, because if you're sitting in a traffic jam, your hydrocarbons going up in the air are going to be enormous. Are all of those pieces envisioned as part of the benefits of NICR?
Yes, exactly. The behavior component is important because essentially we involve lots of their drivers, their riders, they're all, even if they don't drive or ride, they're impacted by transportation activities. One thing that you mentioned is about sustainability or climate. Transportation contributes to 30% of greenhouse gas emissions, and also transportation-related activities, probably about 70% of oil products. So we have a huge impact about energy and emission, air quality is greenhouse gas. So if we can better manage traffic congestion, we will also reduce emissions, energy, and that's going to benefit to the environment and the climate change overall.
How much of NICR looks at, and I know your personal research agenda is in this area, of what I think as sort of the futuristic stuff, the self-driving vehicles, the chained together self-driving units, in improved trains, and the old sort of magnet levitation systems. Does NICR consider all that as well in terms of like, really, what does this brave new world look like?
Yes, that's definitely an important component of NICR technologies. As I said, the technologies have changed a lot of the transportation landscape, and today's understanding of transportation is a lot broader and a lot more interdisciplinary than like 20 years ago. So I mentioned about options and alternatives to managing traffic congestion. One component of those would be using technologies. For example, connected vehicles, we could utilize that technology to realize something I just mentioned, the transit priority, to have the signals know that there is going to be a transit bus coming like 1 minute, and please prepare the traffic signal to better serve that transit bus that has a high ridership. And also, we have projects understand the impacts of like a commercial automated vehicles technologies, and also more advanced connected automated vehicles. Actually, believe it or not, we already have automated vehicles running on the roadways. Right now, there may be just a few percent of those vehicles having like automation capability. These are vehicles with autopilot, adaptive cruise control. Different companies have different reference. And if you turn on that function, the vehicle will automatically follow the preceding vehicle, for example, on freeway. And that's already low level of automation. Such vehicles will change behavior and will impact the traffic dynamics. And we're very excited to see to understand the impact of new technologies and find a better way to manage the traffic in the context of connected automated vehicles.
Do you see a future in our lifetime where people are not going to have their hands on a steering wheel as the primary way of being and going somewhere, whether it's a automated driving vehicle or a bus, a transit system, connected vehicles? Is that our future in 20, 30 years?
Yes, I think that's going to be our future, and I'm confident that we're going to see that day coming. Actually, there are already lots of pilot projects that have demonstrated some prototype technologies. Some of those are just shuttle buses. You just ride on a shuttle bus. You don't see a driver, but there might be one monitor to, have like a computer game handle to monitor that vehicle just in case something goes wrong. And we also, I'm not sure if you have visited Phoenix recently or not, which is previously known as Google Car. They have like regular operations of vehicles without a driver. You can just use their app to hail the vehicle, and the vehicle will park right at the curbside. There is no driver in it, but you can communicate with a remote operator, and that vehicle will send you from point A to point B in Phoenix within a certain geo-fenced area. Of course, we should understand, in order to widely deploy this technology, there could be still some, obstacles, and takes some time, particularly for all kinds of conditions. I would say like a few years ago, like people were really confident. They were saying that, if you read newspapers back that time, you would see reports like, we're going to see 100 million vehicles running completely autonomously without drivers in the year of 2020. But now it's already 2022. We haven't seen that happen. Now there's always like hypes and settling down, and then it's just like a stock market. It has some oscillations, but eventually it's going to grow there. I think we see that right now the industry gets serious, and you have the governments get serious, and people are more receptive to that idea, and we see all sectors of society are moving towards that direction, and I'm pretty confident that will happen sometime in the future.
Yeah, I think those technologies have already outstripped or outpaced, shall we say, the behaviors of people, or at least the understandings of people. I haven't been to Phoenix, but I just was in Las Vegas, and I took Elon Musk's little piece of a loop that's designed to be even bigger. And, it's really interesting that the design is that self-driving electric vehicles will be able to take, groups of 2 or 3 in very narrow tunnels. And so I was like, I got to try this. I got to get, I was out there for a conference and went in there, and there's a driver. And I'm like, that kind of, and so the thing is that Nevada state law hasn't caught up and allow entirely driverless vehicles. So we don't quite have, like in the movie Total Recall, the Johnny cab yet. We'll say yet. So wrapping up then, we've got this tremendous resource here in Tampa, but all over the United States and in Puerto Rico with researchers doing this work. I'll sort of end it with, like, what's your dream outcome of this NICR program? I'll start with Shaw, and then I want to ask Fred as well. What do you want to see? What do you envision?
Yeah, I want to say that from several aspects. First of all, so we could get really better understanding of the systems. We can really provide a new knowledge for us to understand what congestion really is and what causes congestion, and what are the possible ways of looking into the congestion management. And secondly, is about implementation and tech transfer. I would hope to see that governments and industry will utilize the products and outcomes of the research and education activities to, improve their practice. And, overall, if we see that, for example, if some place that has reduced the congestion, and part of the reason is the NICR's research, and, I'll be very happy. And I think we need to have continuous effort to do that. But I've already seen exciting outcomes. We have great publications out. We have great engagement and, tech transfer education activities. We got very well attended the seminar series. We have very nice communications with, both local and national, and sometimes even international experts and stakeholders related to transportation. So as long as we just continue this effort, we're going to make some impacts. And also another thing I want to say is we want to educate the next generation of workforce working in transportation and related fields. I think, arguably civil engineering is the oldest engineering field, and sometimes we have challenges in encouraging the young generation to pursue this career path. But we want to tell that this is amazing. You're really impacting the society, and you can also touch on the fancy aspects of high tech and data, and you can get to private sectors. You can not only just the public sectors. There are high tech companies with branding themselves as transportation companies. So there are lots of opportunities, and we hope to get more and more young people to join this workforce.
And Fred, what's a win in NICR look like for CUTR and for you and for the world?
I think NICR, in addition to providing multiple sort of what I would call short-term solutions to congestion reduction, the longer-term solution that was touched on here is the fully autonomous vehicles, right? Because that, not only would that potentially reduce congestion substantially, but safety is a big concern. And that has the potential to really get us to near zero fatalities and injuries on the highway. But with that said, when you think about next 10 or 20 years, when you have a mix of autonomous vehicles and vehicles, it's going to be an amazing time to research. But how to react to autonomous vehicles is going to astonish behavioral scientists. And so we're going to have a 10 to 20 year period where studying the interaction of autonomous vehicles and driven vehicles is going to be fascinating. But once we get to fully autonomous, then it becomes just an engineering problem. And, what sort of distinguishes transportation engineering from other engineering fields is we have to deal with the element, right? Because when you're building a building, you can design, just for seismic events or whatever. But when you're designing a transportation system, you have to consider how they're going to respond. And that makes it a challenge, but it also makes it fascinating in many respects.
Well, that's great. Well, thank you for both joining us today. Out of My Lane, this season, our first season, is devoted to looking at all of the great research being done at CUTR, and especially that being done through the NICR program. And so each episode going forward will focus on one of the many things we touched on here today, all kinds of really cool innovations and just insights into things that a lot of us just take for granted in terms of our day-to-day life. I'm Wayne Garcia, and on behalf of the Center for Urban Transportation Research at the University of South Florida, thanks for listening. We'll see you next episode.
The National Institute for Congestion Reduction, NICR, is a transportation research center focused on innovative congestion strategies. The center is composed of researchers from the University of South Florida, the University of California, Berkeley, Texas A&M University, and the University of Puerto Rico at Mayagüez, and funded by the United States Department of Transportation. For more information, please visit www.nicr.usf.edu.